A black CEO is quietly forced out of his first-class seat for a so-called priority passenger. Hours later, the airline discovers he controls a $120 million deal that could shake the company to its core. What happened next stunned the entire industry. "Stop right there, sir. You'll have to step aside." The sudden command sliced through the steady hum of the boarding area, sharp enough to make heads turn. Marcus Bell halted mid-stride, his polished shoes just inches from the aircraft doorway. For a moment, the bustling jet bridge seemed to narrow around him, the air thick with recycled coolness and quiet curiosity. Marcus wasn't a distracted tourist or a last-minute standby passenger. He was a man who planned every trip down to the minute. A 38-year-old CEO of Skyling Technologies, a company whose software kept airlines like this one running smoothly across continents. His itinerary had been confirmed weeks ago, his first-class ticket paid in full by his own credit card. Nothing about this morning hinted at trouble. The security line had been routine, the lounge calm, his boarding call announced right on time. Yet the gate agent's crisp, unwavering tone carried an authority that stopped him cold. Passengers behind Marcus paused, the shuffle of carry-ons and the chatter of families falling into a hush. Someone cleared a throat. Someone else pretended to scroll through a phone, but angled the screen just enough to record. "Sir," the agent repeated, gesturing toward the side of the jet bridge as though Marcus had wandered into restricted territory. "We need you to wait while we seat a priority customer." Marcus blinked, a subtle frown creasing his forehead. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said evenly, holding out the boarding pass that clearly read seat 2, first class. But the agent's polite smile hardened. "Your seat has been reassigned." A low ripple of whispers traveled down the line. From a corner of his eye, Marcus caught a flash of movement inside the cabin. A tall, silver-haired businessman settling into the wide leather seat marked 2A. The man's briefcase rested where Marcus's bag should have been. The scene unfolded in slow motion. A flight attendant leaned in to help the newcomer stow his coat. Another agent tapped a tablet, deliberately avoiding Marcus's gaze. Around them, travelers tried to look uninterested, but their eyes darted between the dark-suited black executive and the white passenger, now sipping complimentary champagne. Marcus felt a weight press across his chest. The contrast between his carefully chosen charcoal suit and the darker shade of his skin suddenly felt magnified under the sterile overhead lights. He heard the faint hum of the aircraft systems, the distant clatter of luggage in the hold, and beneath it all the unspoken question hanging in the recycled air. Why him? He steadied his breath, drawing on years of boardroom discipline, but the sting of humiliation burned sharper than any corporate negotiation he had ever faced. Marcus stayed calm. "There must be a mistake. I'm in 2A, he said, offering his boarding pass with a steady hand. The gate agent accepted it without even a glance at the seat number, the paper barely flicking under her eyes before she handed it back, as if it were meaningless. "Sir, we'll reassign you to economy, so we can accommodate our platinum member," she replied, her voice clipped and final. The word struck harder than the cold blast of air coming from the open cabin door. A startled murmur rippled through the line of passengers waiting to board. A young woman in a denim jacket gasped softly. A father juggling a sleepy toddler shot Marcus a sympathetic glance. The energy shifted from routine travel fatigue to tense curiosity. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, each heartbeat drumming against the collar of his shirt. Still, his voice remained even controlled. "I paid for first class," he said, each word deliberate, his years in corporate negotiations lending weight to his tone. "You can't just—" Before he could finish, the agent cut him off with a practiced interruption. "Sir, either accept the change or deplane. Those are your options." The silence that followed was sharper than the agent's words. Two uniformed security officers stepped forward from the terminal entrance, their black shoes clicking against the jet bridge floor. Their presence wasn't loud, but it carried unmistakable authority. One officer rested a hand lightly on his belt, a gesture that needed no explanation. Marcus scanned their faces. The officers avoided direct eye contact, but their posture left no room for negotiation. Behind them, The boarding line had stalled completely. Travelers held their breath, as though watching an unexpected drama unfold. Someone a few rows back raised a phone, the lens catching the fluorescent lights as it began to record. Others followed suit, screens rising like quiet witnesses. The unspoken message was clear: comply, or be escorted out in front of dozens of strangers, and thousands more online once the video spread. Marcus inhaled slowly, steadying the racing of his heart. Years of steering multimillion-dollar deals had taught him the strength of patience, the value of choosing the right moment to act. Losing his composure now would hand them the scene they seemed to expect. "I'll step off," he said at last, his voice firm but quiet. He reached down, lifted his leather briefcase, and straightened his shoulders. Not a single ounce of anger showed on his face, only an unmistakable dignity. As he turned back toward the terminal, the crowd parted slightly. A whisper floated through the hushed space, barely louder than the soft hiss of the cabin air. "Unbelievable," someone murmured, the single word carrying both disbelief and quiet solidarity. Marcus walked past the rows of watching eyes, each step deliberate, the echo of his shoes on the jet bridge a steady counterpoint to the pounding of his heart. What no one at the gate knew was that Marcus wasn't just another customer. Behind the tailored suit and calm demeanor stood the driving force of Skyling Technologies, a company whose aviation software kept planes flying on schedule for dozens of international carriers. Every boarding pass scanned, every maintenance check logged, every seat assignment made possible by Skyling systems. Without that seamless technology, airlines would be drowning in delays and costly errors. This particular airline relied on Skylink more than most. For months, their executive team had been negotiating a renewal of the contract that powered their entire reservation network. The deal, worth a staggering $120 million, was more than a budget line. It was the backbone of their competitive edge. Losing it would mean scrambling for a replacement system, risking chaos at airports around the world, and triggering a financial hit their shareholders would not forgive. Marcus knew all of this as he stepped back into the bustling terminal. He carried the knowledge like an invisible shield, each measured stride fueled by a quiet certainty of his own leverage. Around him, travelers hurried to gates, flight announcements echoed overhead, and the smell of coffee and jet fuel mixed in the air. Yet Marcus moved as if the chaos belonged to someone else. His phone vibrated in his pocket, first once, then again and again, a cascade of notifications from employees, colleagues, even friends outside the company. Someone had already uploaded a video of the incident. By the time he reached the quiet corner near a row of windows, it had racked up thousands of views. Headlines flashed across the screen. CEO removed from first class for priority passenger. Marcus didn't waste time scrolling. He answered only one call, the name of his chief financial officer glowing on the display. "Marcus, we've all seen it," the CFO said, voice low but urgent. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, steady as ever. He watched a plane taxi across the tarmac, sunlight glinting off its wings. "But the contract isn't." A pause crackled across the line. "You mean?" "Put the renewal on hold," Marcus said quietly, every word deliberate. "Tell their leadership we need to review whether they still meet our company's values. No exceptions." The CFO exhaled sharply. "Understood. I'll alert the legal team and freeze the process." Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Around him, the terminal buzzed on, unaware that a single decision had just shifted millions of dollars and the future of an entire airline. By the next morning, #RespectAllPassengers was everywhere, on news tickers, trending across every major social platform, and flashing across the phones of millions who had never set foot in an airport. The 30-second clip of Marcus Bell being escorted off a first-class cabin while a white passenger reclined in his rightful seat had been replayed from every possible angle. Morning shows debated the incident, pundits weighed in on travel rights and racial bias, and aviation bloggers dissected the airline's public relations nightmare in real time. Inside the airline's glass-walled headquarters, panic replaced the usual hum of routine. Emails flew like sparks from an overloaded wire. "We can't lose the Skylink deal," one executive wrote in bold red letters that soon circulated through every department. Finance teams tallied the potential loss. Legal advisors drafted emergency memos. Public relations specialists huddled over laptops, struggling to craft statements that didn't sound hollow. By mid-morning, an emergency board meeting was underway. Directors dialed in from 3 time zones, their faces pale in the glow of video screens. Reports showed the company's stock sliding steadily as investors digested the viral footage. Analysts warned of a chain reaction. Without Skylink software, reservation systems could falter, maintenance schedules might fall apart, and customer trust would erode overnight. The airline CEO, a seasoned executive with decades in the industry, decided on the most direct route. He reached for his personal phone and called Marcus Bell himself. The line clicked, and Marcus's measured voice answered. "Mr. Bell," the CEO began, the strain in his tone impossible to hide. "I want to offer my deepest apologies on behalf of the airline. We are launching a full internal investigation. This behavior is unacceptable and does not reflect our values." Marcus listened in silence, gazing out the window of his downtown office as the city below stirred to life. He could hear the urgency in the man's voice, but refused to fill the pause. Finally, he spoke, calm and deliberate. "An apology isn't enough," he said. "Words won't repair the culture that allowed this to happen. I need to see action, mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all staff, a clear and enforceable anti-discrimination policy, and documented consequences for employees who fail to uphold it. Until those measures are implemented and verified, the $120 million contract remains frozen." On the other end, the CEO exhaled audibly, understanding the weight of the ultimatum. Within hours, news of Marcus's stance hit the financial markets. Analysts broadcast urgent updates, and the airline's shares dipped further, shedding millions in market value before the trading day closed. Investors, alarmed by the potential loss of critical technology services, began calling the board directly. What had started as a single act of bias on a boarding bridge had now become a corporate reckoning, one with a price tag no executive could ignore. A week later, the airline tried to steady itself by unveiling a list of sweeping reforms. In a carefully worded statement sent to every major outlet, they pledged to launch mandatory diversity and inclusion training for every employee, from the newest gate agent to the top executives. They announced an anonymous reporting hotline for travelers and staff to document bias or misconduct without fear of retaliation. And they rolled out a newly updated passenger rights policy, one that clearly outlined procedures for seating disputes and guaranteed that no traveler could be downgraded because of status, race, or appearance. The announcement made headlines, but Marcus Bell did not take their promises at face value. He insisted on proof that the reforms were more than words on a press release. Auditors hired by Skylink were sent to review training modules, and independent investigators were given access to personnel records. Only after those steps were verified, after Marcus saw evidence of real structural change, did he agree to resume the stalled contract negotiations. When the airline invited him to a joint press conference, Marcus accepted, but on his own conditions. He would speak first. There would be no carefully staged handshake until he finished, and the full press corps would be allowed to ask questions, not just a select few. The conference room overflowed with journalists, camera crews, and curious travelers who had followed the story online. Bright studio lights reflected off the polished wood podium as Marcus stepped forward, impeccably dressed but without a trace of ostentation. His voice, when it came, was steady and unyielding. "This was never about revenge," he began, his gaze sweeping across the rows of cameras and microphones. "It's about respect. No passenger, no human being, should be treated as less because of the color of their skin. No corporate policy, no membership tier, no so-called priority passenger can justify humiliation." Reporters scribbled notes, flashes flickered, and for a moment the room held an almost reverent silence. The airline's CEO followed, acknowledging the company's failure in unusually direct terms. He accepted responsibility for the incident and pledged a long-term commitment to equity and accountability. "We failed Mr. Bell," he said. "More importantly, we failed every customer who expects fairness when they fly with us." Finally, after the statements were complete, Marcus extended his hand. The CEO grasped it firmly, the cameras firing in rapid succession. Everyone in the room knew that while both men stood as equals on that stage, it was Marcus Bell who had set the terms, not just for a contract, but for how a global airline would treat its passengers from that day forward. Want more moments that spark change? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Your next favorite story is coming soon.